just helping your group is one thing, but if you do it to the detriment of another group, that's when it becomes nationalism.
Okay, can you explain to me who owes you reparations? They're not going to say the government.
It
They're going to say
doesn't.
white people.
I'm asking you to steelman a position that you know does not exist, and you're making it up. And I'm asking you to somehow make some sense of this. How could somebody possibly believe this? Because I don't even believe that you believe somebody believes this. This is insane.
I just realized okay, so we're going back to the same instance of you misconstruing what I'm saying here, which is
I'm not.
I can see you laughing. From black people.
Yes.
From the government. Yeah,
from the government. Not from
the black people. Black people make up the government. They still say, "Hey, give me my money."
It's the people who endured the infliction of the enslavement who would be asking the reparations. So it doesn't matter if black people were a majority of society. They would still be asking from those other black people.
But none of those people will still be present like 4 centuries back. Like, how would you be able to track any of those people? Like, they've sort of intermixed or whatever. Like, how would you be able to track?
We're not talking
indentured servants. You know, those that was like a form of slaves of slavery, but it was not. You were not being racist to those people.
Oh shit! Let me mute the stream. Okay. Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, man. What have you been up to?
Nothing. Streaming.
I'm seeing a lot of your reactions actually. That you've been doing quite great. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah.
What? In what? Like.
Well, like to begin, like you're the kind of like I've watched your streams for like let's say a couple of years now.
Mm-hmm.
And you like actually never had anything going for yourself. Like, don't take this like the negative way or whatever. Like, I don't mean to in a way, right? But like the stuff that you're doing now seems to be a little more entertaining than the stuff that you used to before. Like, would you?
I don't think I've changed anything. I think that there's just a lot more people watching now. That to me, that's the only difference.
Yeah, like your viewership definitely has increased, but I don't know what changed, because if you're saying you're doing the same thing as before, I don't know like what could be causing that difference. Like even myself, like I used to watch your stream, but just like they would not retain my attention as much as like they are now. So I'm just like trying to get to like put my finger on exactly what it could be. So
I think the difference is that the more that people are watching, the more relevant it's going to be in the space, and the more that other content creators are going to talk about what's happening on my show, and the more they're going to review it, and the more other content creators are in my chat. And like it now, instead of me just always reacting to what's going on around, I'm also like setting narratives a lot more often as well. And so it just like I talked about this last night with somebody. There was a long period of time where it just seemed like I was shadow banned, and I was never getting, I could go through all my analytics and there was never views through the algorithm, but I didn't change the way that I do like my titles. I didn't change the way that I do my thumbnails or anything like that. It's all the same. The only difference is that like it seems like I just was not shadow banned anymore, and then started growing. I've always had like big name people on. I've always had the same debates. I've always talked about the same things. I've always covered the same things. It just I
mean, why would if that's the case, why would that even be? Because like you're pretty centrist liberal in my opinion.
I wasn't.
So I don't know.
I started off very far right. So
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that adds up. Wait, you were like a right way, how far right were you?
I was like more of like a Richard Spencer follower when I first started.
Oh shit. Wait, how long ago was this?
About 4 years ago. That's when I first started doing content.
4 years ago, you used to follow Richard Spencer?
Yeah.
But like, what did you agree with them on? Like you
mostly
made you like him.
So mostly the white stuff. Like, so it like what really like appealed to me is that like white people were being treated differently from everybody else, and it seemed unfair, and that there were always like these biases towards white people, and everybody else could do and say things that white people couldn't do and say.
But I feel like that's gotten worse now than before. So like, if anything, you should be like more right leaning than anything else.
Yeah, I think I started to realize it doesn't actually exist the way that I thought it did. Like it's so it
Wait.
one thing that I started to realize is that there's a lot of like good propaganda out there with anecdotal videos where they're just showing small little things that are happening all over the place. But those small little things, I don't ever know those people. I don't ever see those people. The people that I interact with don't ever say those things. And so I started to wonder, like, well, how big is this actually? Then, the more I started getting into left leaning spaces, it was even insanely uncommon within left leaning spaces. And it was like really, really small groups within those left leaning spaces that were doing those things as well. And so it was always made to look like, oh, these are just Democrats. These are just normal Democrats who are just these crazy leftist nutcases who are running around doing anti-white stuff and saying anti-white stuff and pushing anti-white sentiments. And then, yeah, I found out like, oh, that's not the case at all. Like it's just these like niche
even
little
I like
groups.
as a I don't know what I would consider myself. I just like go with whatever I see that's like it's actually happening or it's real. Even I like when I see these things, like when I see what people are talking about, like about racism, what do we call it? The
Real quick, hold on. I'm
institutionalized.
sorry. One
Sorry.
second. I've been wanting to respond to this. Vlad said, Tomfoolery Show, you're getting more views because you're filling a content niche. People want to see the reactions to Destiny Sphere drama, and you're covering it when no one else is. Again, this is like, I haven't changed my content. And it seems like there's more people covering Destiny type content than ever before. So it like, again, the difference is I'm actually getting algorithm views. I'm actually getting found in the search engine. I'm actually getting like my content pushed. Before, every single thing, like you could go through my stuff and it said every view was coming from another platform. It was coming from links from other people posting it on Discord, on Reddit, on Twitter, on Facebook. Like it always came from links. And so nobody ever found my content naturally. It just was always links, or they saw me on somebody else's channel. But when they saw me on somebody else's channel, whenever they popped up into my chat, they would immediately say, bro, it's taken me like an hour to find you. No, most people are not going to spend an hour trying to find me. So if they see me on somebody else's channel and they like what they hear, they're not going to spend a freaking hour looking for me. They're going to give up after like 5 minutes at most. So yeah, it had to have been just that the way that people were capable of finding me changed. And then I just kept doing the same stuff, and it actually did well. So yeah, I haven't changed anything. Like all of the stuff that I've done has been exactly
Yeah,
the same.
I kind of agree with you on that. It's just like, don't even give these people so much airtime. These people are like fucking peasants, dude. Just like your audience is just like you're the big dog, bro. Like, what are you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just like, don't give so much airtime to like the dumb shit these people are saying.
So I should kick you out of the
No,
VC right
no.
now?
Oh no, I'm just memeing right now.
Mm.
Just like be the Giga chat and just like, yeah, whatever.
Well, no,
But,
I mean, I'm just they're not being like a dick about it. I'm just like explaining.
No, but no, I hear you. I hear you. No, it does make sense. What that speculation did somehow connect in a way, but your response also, made sense. What was I saying? What were we talking about earlier? Before you said of the detour and the responding to the commenter.
You were saying that. Crap, I don't remember what you were saying.
Oh yeah, wait. We were talking about right wingers, Richard Spencer. What
Oh
else?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, but okay. So the white discriminations, whatever, lefty, right wingers. What? Okay, so there's like the circles, there's inner circles, so and so. Okay, so and then I was responding to like how I, as a person, like I don't even know where I stand as far as like politically, but I don't like a lot of the things that these people are saying. I do like in a way I see like it's like maybe mostly like online because like in real life like you don't tend to like these things are very like they're not as common as they're made to like they're made to be seen, you know, like online or whatever, like on YouTube. You know, it's like a video gets posted on YouTube and it's like not representative of like the majority or even like the average experiences that people would have, or like a white person or whatever black person being discriminated against. It's like a very rare scenario, but you know, still the way that it's painted, it's made to be seen like it's a more common than it actually is. So I get your point when it comes to that, but you can still agree with that on the validity of it, even if it's like not like a very sort of niche or, you know, like rare scenario or like, you know, instance. Do you not agree with that?
What do you mean?
Like those instances of like, you know, let's say
Well, my
racial
point is that it
discriminations and
wasn't
things like
nearly
that.
as bad as it existed. So I'm saying that yeah, it existed in some sense, just not the way that they made it out to be.
But as
And
far as like quantity goes, I guess it was not as bad. But like if it's like if let's say if your perception of like let's say for instance like whites being discriminated against or whatever, or being easily portrayed as racist, you know, anytime like they speak against like a black person or whatever, they talk in a negative way or they criticize. Like in most, if that happens to be less common than you originally thought it was, I don't think it changes the fact that, you know, the severity of it's still wrong. Like
yeah,
the
sure.
fact that it's happening is still bad. So like,
yeah,
you're sort of relying
I
on
don't
like
disagree with that. I still call people out for doing like racist stuff towards white people. That's just the Richard Spencer stuff was like, you know, there's this epidemic and we need to separate from everybody else and we need to have our own you know, nation of people, and we need to kind of like stop pretending uh like anybody else is more oppressed than white people, and like yeah, it was all cringe and
like you
wrong.
presume that it was like this epidemic. So okay, that makes sense. That's probably what. So like, where do you stand now politically? Like, what do you land?
I
Like,
have no idea. I somewhere towards the middle, probably like a center left liberal.
I kind of find it disturbing, like that you have to like box yourself. Like whenever like, people like I don't know, even like I fall victim to
You're
this
the
too. Like you know,
freaking one asking
I
right
know
now,
this is
bro.
so like I'm self-admitting, like I'm even asking you that question, and I too fall victim to this. Where like I have to somehow like box myself. Why can't I just like be a normal person who just like has, you know, varying opinions about certain things? Like why do I have to like either land right or left or like centrist? Like who cares? Like why can't I just like be a normal human being with like different opinions or whatever? I can have really like fucking healthcare or like, you know, closed borders or like whatnot. Like who cares? Like why do you have to box yourself? Like choose a political side so people can
We
just like call you a
categorize
left.
everything. Like as humans, we literally categorize everything.
Well, I get that
the
that's
way we
like the
communicate
general
things.
case, but like I just disagree with that. I think we should just like sort of try to get rid of that and, you know, be a little more critical of whenever like anyone's trying to like categorize a person based on like their ideas and just like box them into this political view. I think we should like push back against that and just say, you know, let's just let people be, and you know, if they don't feel comfortable being, you know, pushed into this political side, and just, you know, let people be who they want to be or whatever. Or it's just like
I mean,
don't
I
pressure
guess
people into like identifying into things that they don't feel comfortable identifying with. That's all.
I don't think anybody's going to force you to identify with something that you don't want to, but that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that other people aren't going to categorize you themselves, right?
Well,
So
you don't have to
if I
accept
look
that
at
either. Like,
yeah,
you
you
don't
don't
have
have
to
to
go by those
accept
standards.
it, but like looking at groypers, right? They love to cope and say that they're not white nationalists. They are white nationalists. Like by the definition, they just are white nationalists, and they can keep saying, "Oh, well,
Right,
I
but they
don't
could also
identify as a white
refuse to
nationalist."
identify as that.
Yeah, that's fine,
Because
but
like you
we're
don't
all
have
going
a
to keep
right, like
calling them white nationalists. I
right,
don't
but that's
believe
like
in
a
you
game.
self-IDing
No,
yourself.
I get it.
That's
I get it.
bullcrap.
Well, I also don't believe that you should like be able to identify people like into box people into something that they don't feel comfortable identifying with. And I get it.
So
Like in some
if
cases, it can be
somebody
quite convenient to
says,
like not do that. Like it
so
can be quite convenient to like not identify as like a far right winger or whatever.
well,
But
no,
like you can still
let's
not.
say somebody says that they're a woman, but you think they're a man. Are you going to call them a woman just because they said they are one?
Well, now you're talking about like a very clear cut
A
definition, or
white
like a
nationalist is a
line
clear-cut
of what
definition.
something. No, it's not. There are plenty
What do you
different
mean?
types of. They're leftists or like could be fucking.
No, bro, you're
Richard
coping now.
Spencer
White
a lefty or
nationalist
something?
is a no. White nationalist is you can be a lefty and still be a white nationalist. A white nationalist has nothing to do with right or left. A
But
white
by
nationalist,
definition, that demonstrates that it's not as clear cut as you're making it seem.
no, it's not. It has nothing to do. So a a nationalist is somebody who puts their group of people above others. So they just care about their group of people. That's what a nationalist is. Then a white nationalist is saying the white part is the group of people that I'm talking about. A black nationalist is the same thing. Like any type of nationalist is going to be the same thing. You just put the part in front of it to say
Right, but
what type
I
of
see
nationalist.
what you're saying, but that's like, if we go by that definition, it's like anyone is like a nationalist, like of like filling the group, whatever they identify with. Because like it's a norm that
Well,
people
if
in
it's a
general
nation of
are
people,
gonna have
yeah.
this preference towards, like people that are like them.
Yes, if
So
it's
that's
a
like
nation of
it
people,
makes.
yeah.
So are we just gonna just identify anyone's like a fucking whatever race they are nationalist?
Well, no, I don't put white people above other groups of people. I put Americans above every other country, and so you could
But
call
what
me
do you
an
mean by
American
above?
nationalist.
What do you mean by
Meaning
like
you put
putting people
their
above others?
needs and their wants above others. You care.
But even the average black person does this. The average Hispanic person, like, if everyone's like that type of like, no one
So
is. Then
it means like the line for a nationalist means, are you willing to do something for your group, even if it's to the detriment of another group? That's kind of where the line is. So if you're
yeah,
willing to
that's
hurt
typically
another
how it
group
goes.
to
Yes.
help your group, just helping your group is one thing. But if you do it to the detriment of another group, that's when it becomes nationalism. So a black person saying, hey, we need reparations, that's not nationalism, because it's not actually hurting anybody else for black people to get reparations. But if they say, hey, we need to like take all of Oklahoma, and all of Oklahoma is now just for black people. Yeah, that would be black nationalism. If
So
they're
to
like,
the
we're just going to
detriment of
kick everybody
whom?
else out.
Wait, to the detriment of whom would it be to ask for reparations then? Isn't
Nobody. That's what I'm saying.
that black supremacists?
No, I'm saying it's not to the detriment of anybody. That's why it's not nationalism.
Well, when people ask, this is like, okay, so generally we understand that when black people ask for reparations, we know who they're talking about, like who should be paying whatever. Like we can like implicitly understand what they mean by this. Like, is there like a ambiguity there or something? Like
I have no idea what you're saying right now.
Okay, so okay, so when a black person says, "Okay, so we've been enslaved, whatever, so we now want reparation. You owe us reparations." Who do you think that you is?
America. So the country
Dude,
promised them
come
something.
on.
The country promised them something. The
Okay,
country.
if
is
it
the
were to
one-
be a
hold
group-
on, wait, hold on.
It's
Hold
like-
on. Stop.
Dude,
You every
this
time
is
you ask me a question, you start talking over me. You do this literally every time, bro.
Okay, fine.
All right. I don't believe in reparations, but
It doesn't matter.
but it has nothing to do with it being to the detriment of anybody. It's just because I think that it's like a dumb argument for it. But their argument is that the money was promised to them for specific things, and then they did not get the money. And then
No.
what do you mean no? The money
You're
was
getting
promised
into
to
the
them.
details. That's going like beneath the point, that like actually like beyond the point that I'm making actually.
Well, no,
What
the
I'm
point is
talking
that
about
they
is
are
that when
owed
a
money
black person
by the
says that,
country.
okay, we are owed reparations, who owes who do you think they
I get
mean
it.
that owes them
Okay.
reparations?
Yeah, I get it. You're saying you don't like my answer because you want me to say white people, even though that's not about white people. It's about the country. That's what you're saying. It has nothing to do with me going into too much detail. It has to do with the fact that you're
That's a bad
coping too
faith.
hard to actually accept reality. That's what it is.
Okay, this is like a debate tactic that you're pulling right now.
No,
and,
it's
like,
not a
the
debate
chat can
tactic.
clearly see
It is
I mean,
not. No, they
we all-
cannot.
the
Bro,
chat-
you are
even
making
the chat
stuff up.
understand that, when like black people say we want reparations, they're talking about white people.
No,
It's like
it
it's
has
not
nothing to
even
do with white
just people.
people. Tell me where
Oh,
it has to do with
God.
white people. Explain then.
Okay.
You can't just keep making
If
that
there were to
statement.
be
The
okay.
country is the one who they want the money from. The country is the one who made the promises. The country is the one who they're looking to for
Sometimes
reparations.
they even say these things explicitly. We white people owe us reparations. That's
Okay,
like, that's
so
not
those
even-
people. Okay, so if somebody said something like that, then sure, that person is probably some sort of nationalist. Sure, but I like
Okay.
those are rare
So-
people.
So what you think that they mean like just like Hispanics or like other black people, like we want reparations, but we want it from other black people or Hispanics who probably nothing to do with slavery, but yeah, it's just anyone. I mean, this is what I was like. It just sounds disingenuous to like any listener out there, but whatever.
Yeah,
we can
again,
move
it's the
past the point.
country. We're not talking like nobody's taking the money from specific people. It's the country who owes them the money, so it's the country who would give it to them.
So you think that if the country were to be majority like 90% black and like 7% white, or let's say 3% whatever else, you think that if they were to be asking for reparations, then that would be meaningless because who exactly is going to be handing them that reparation?
Okay, so if I get a bunch of applications for a job, and
Wait,
all
okay,
of the, no, hold on,
let me rephrase
no, I need you to chill. Okay, if I get a bunch of applications for a job, and I'm going just purely based on how qualified they are to do the job, like how much school they had, how much training they had, how much experience within the position they have, and I need to hire 20 people, and 10 of the people who applied are black out of the 30 people. But I hire everybody except for those 10 black people. Those 10 black people happen to be the ones who had the least amount of experience and the least amount of qualifications. Did I do something that was racist in this scenario just because it happened to not hire the black people?
No, because you hire them based on merits, not anything,
exactly.
not because of
So
race.
your point
How does that
about
relate to
the
the argument I
percent,
made?
because you're saying that even though they're not actually trying to get the money from white people, the outcome would be that it's white people anyway.
No, it's because that is
Then I'm asking
implicitly
you another
said
question
in their
about
demands.
outcomes.
That's what the point that I'm making.
Yes, and it's same with this. Like, oh well,
Dude,
you obviously
the country, if the
didn't
country's
give
like
black
fucking
people a job.
95% black,
You won't
they
let
would
me
no
answer
longer be
anything,
asking for
bro. It's
reparations.
so
Like, it wouldn't make any
obnoxious,
sense
dude.
to ask
I
for
can't
reparations.
keep doing this with you if you're just gonna
What do
talk
you-
over me every time
okay,
you stop
sorry.
talking.
Sorry, you just keep going on and on. But okay, I thought you went past the point. Like, I got the point you made, but you just sort of continued on. But that's fine. I'll let you.
I stayed quiet while you were answering, and then you stopped, and then I started to respond to that, and then you started talking over me again, and then I started to respond to that, and then you started talking over me again. So I hadn't talked past any point.
No, you're right.
The-
I just felt like your response was sufficient enough to like my
Okay.
question or the answer that I gave you. So I just thought that just like to avoid it.
So yeah, so when you say that that's the implication, there's nothing there to actually say that that's the implication. You're saying that that's the outcome either way.
Because it would only make sense that if they're talking about reparations, it's because like a wrongdoing that was done to them, and the wrongdoing was done by like a particular group of people. You think like if they were to group like certain different races, let's say Asians, Hispanics, white, or other blacks, whatever, and you ask a black person who's like in favor of reparations, and you were to ask this person, okay, tell me who owes you reparation. Point at the group that owes you reparation. Who do you think they'll be pointing at?
The government. They're not asking white people to hand them money. They're asking the government to give them money.
That's outside of the options that I sort of gave, right? That's outside of the options that I presented. I asked if a black person who's in favor of reparations were to be point at the group that owed them reparation,
Mhm.
and there were a group of Hispanics, whites, Asians, and other blacks, who would this person be pointing at as the person who actually owes them reparation, as the group that would be owing them reparations? Would it be the Hispanics, the whites, the other blacks, or the Asian? Who do you think they'll be pointing at?
I guess, okay, you answer this question first then. If I
Okay,
said
dude,
point
this
at
is-
the no, hold on,
Come
because this
on.
is gonna. If I say point out the black person, and I put a Chinese person, a white person, and a Mexican person in front of you, and I ask you to point at the white person, which one are you gonna point at? That's what you're asking me to do right now.
No.
Yes, that
The
is exactly
fact-
what you're
wait, no,
asking
no,
me to
wait,
do right now.
wait, the
That is
fact
exactly
that you're
what you're
assuming that reparations and like a white person and like whites are synonymous in a way, that just means that like you're agreeing with me. You're It's like defeating your own argument. You're
No, it's not. So there are systems in place that are causing problems, and those systems are put in place by another system. And so it is the systems
Sure.
that have to pay reparations. It is not the
But who-
people. We're not
who
going
were the
after George
people?
Washington for allowing slavery to exist. We're going after the
Right.
the system that put this in
Jesus
place.
Christ. Okay, Tom. I think you're being disingenuous. I
I-
don't mean to call you out, but I think that's just
You're
like
not
what's
calling
happening
me
here.
out. You're
I-
coping, and it's beautiful
I
because
think we
there's no
both
way
understand,
you're
and
not.
any average person would understand.
You can't explain it. You're just coping.
Any
It
average
doesn't make
person would
sense.
understand that any black person who's in favor of reparation, and you were to ask this person, okay, can you explain to me who owes you reparations? They're not going to say the government.
It
They're going to say
doesn't.
white people.
It doesn't matter because they're not asking white people to give them money.
That is what we're talking about, though. We are talking about the people who are responsible for reparations, because we want to actually
So they
make
want
the case that
they want
anyone who's
George
asking
Washington
who's in
to
favor
give
of
them money.
reparations is
They
in a
want
way
George
racist.
Washington to give them money.
No,
Yes, you
that's
said
not
the
what.
people responsible. You said the
When
people
you ask them, they're
responsible.
not going to say George Washington, like people like whites from like 200 years ago or whatever. They're probably going to say, or 200 plus years ago, they're probably going to say white people, just generally.
Okay,
speaking.
true. So steelman this argument for me then. How are white people today responsible for slavery 200
I never said
years
that they
ago?
were.
Well, no, you are saying that. I'm asking you to
No.
steelman that argument.
No.
Steelman that argument.
You
How
try to
would
put
they
words in my
say?
mouth that
No,
I
I am
never
not.
said.
No, I'm not. Do you know what a steelman is? A steelman
Yes.
is where you represent somebody else's argument. I'm not putting words in your
Sure.
mouth. I'm asking
But
you to put words in their mouth.
No, well, you sort of
Steelman
reframe
that
an argument in a more favorable light. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yes, steelman the argument. How are white people today responsible for? Because you're the one who's saying that you understand their argument better than I do.
Steelman a position that I've never had.
Yes, but no, I'm asking you to steelman a position you just made up. That's what I'm
Steelman,
asking
like,
you to
what
do.
black people
I'm
should all
asking
be
you to
killed.
steelman a
Steelman that
position.
for me.
I'm asking you to steelman a position that you know does not exist and you're making it up. And I'm asking you to somehow make some sense of this. How could somebody possibly believe this? Because I don't even believe that you believe somebody believes this. This is insane. This is an insane
No.
position.
What I'm actually saying here is that one thing that I'm saying is that I'm not agreeing that whites are responsible for like giving anyone reparations. What I'm saying is that
Yeah,
their
me too.
actual understanding of how the system works. They think it doesn't matter if they know that, like fucking the whites today are not the ones who enslaved them or whatever. What matters to them is that those people are descendants of those whites from the past, and therefore they hold let's say a responsibility, some sort of accountability for those things that happened to them in the past. That is what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that they actually are responsible. What I'm actually saying is that in a way they see a connection, a lineage that's, today it still exists of white people that are descendants of those people, and in a way they find them responsible for slavery. I'm not agreeing with that with the mentality. I'm empathizing with it though.
Yeah. So you're just saying that white people happen to be the people who are the majority, and they happen to be the people who are within the government, and they happen to be the people who put them into slavery, but they're not asking white people for the money, and they don't care to ask white people for
the
money.
slavery part and people in the government, because there are other minorities that are also form part of the government, but they understand in a way that those white people, they are descendants of those whites who did enslave a lot of blacks and so forth.
Sure.
Or, in a way they
Okay.
see there is a passed on sort of a wealth or certain
Okay.
things that they feel
So-
like they should
so
be
if
paid
I-
back for some of those things by the
If
whites that exist today.
if I go to Africa and they pull me over and they say, "Hey, you were speeding in this zone. You have to pay $200." And so I hand them the $200 right then. But then I protest it later with the government and I say, "Hey, I wasn't speeding." They check the cameras, they see I wasn't speeding, and they have to give me back money. Do I want reparations from black people, or do I want reparations from the African government?
Well, in that sense, I think your comparison now is assuming that the government holds you accountable or fines you for certain things that are unjustified, and to now, who is now responsible for those things? In that case, you're talking about okay. I just realized what. Okay, so we're going back to the same instance of you misconstruing what I'm saying here, which
I'm
is,
not
and
though.
I can see you. I can see you laughing.
I'm
And that
not
is
though.
that you
I
think
am
that
not
I agree with this. You think that
misconstruing
somehow I
anything.
agree with that because the majority of the people who form the government are black people. Therefore, they're all responsible. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not agreeing with I'm saying I'm empathizing with their mentality. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that I agree with it at all.
Okay. All right. Somebody else wants to ask you a question, so hold on. I'm gonna pull it.
Wait, I'm not agreeing to accepting callers. Do I get
You
to
don't
consent to
no,
this
you don't
or?
have to. Yeah, I'm just but they I don't have anywhere else to go with this. I don't like you're just not it feels like you're just not engaging. So
I am
they
engaging,
feel
but
like
I
they
feel like
can
you're not
reword.
accepting this premise here that just because I understand their mentality does not mean that I agree with it. You're asking me these trap questions as though like I'm gonna like somehow agree that like the people who are actually that are part of the government, that are the majority of that particular government, are the ones that because if you get fined, yeah, there are laws in place that are there to make sure that you don't break the laws or whatever. And sometimes those they don't always work, in the best way possible. Sometimes they're not as as efficient as they could be. It doesn't change the fact that that group actually voted for those laws to be in place, and they do not mean for those laws to be misused or used to harm other people. But I don't think you can make the same argument about slavery. That's not. I don't think that they're very comparable.
So generally in the United States, we call looking at groups of people as doing a thing. And when we talk about that group, we're saying it based on race. We generally call that racism when we're saying this group did this thing and therefore this group has to pay for it. We don't do things based on groups. We do things based on individuals, or we do it based on systems, or we do things based on corporations or things like that, but we don't do it based on groups. And so we generally consider that to be racism if people are doing that.
I think that slavery in a way is different because although the government approved it, I think that a lot of the slave owners were independent. They were like private citizens. There were a lot of wealthy people. They were still private citizens. So I think it's looked at from this different lens because it's you're comparing this to like a government official or like a
Well, no,
government
it was
worker like
government
finding
officials.
you.
No. Hold on. They're not paying them for freaking like being slaves. It's like the 50 acres and a mule promise that actually went into them actually doing labor for the government. They were actually working for the government, and they did not get paid what it was that they were promised, and that is the reparations. It has nothing to do with slavery.
Uh, well, I'm not too aware like the slaves that well yeah, I guess there were slaves also working for the government, but in that case, I think that yeah, no, I see your point. And I also understand why they would be. And again, I'm not agreeing with that. I'm making the argument because I empathize with their views. I see where they're coming from with that. And although it's misguided, it's still an argument that many people can understand.
Okay.
And I was just only bringing that up to prove that holding people accountable for reparations, and you would agree that if you were to ask a lot of black people, like who is the group that's responsible for like owing you reparations, they're probably gonna tell you it's white people, right? Would you agree
Uh,
with that argument in general?
that they would generally say
The
white
group
people
that's
are the.
responsible for reparations are whites, generally speaking. If they were to choose like from any other race, let's say
Yeah,
Hispanics,
sure. I
Asians,
mean,
black, whatever, in
white
general, you would agree that it would say, yeah, it's white people.
white people are going to be the majority of the taxpayers, if that's what you mean. So yeah, of
Whether or not
course.
they could be the minority in, let's say, 20, 50, whatever. But if you were to ask a black person who's in favor of reparations,
who's responsible for it, who owes you reparations, it'll be white people, right?
No, it's the government.
Dude,
You keep saying it's white
that's
people.
I'm not
but
asking you what you think it is. I'm asking you what what do you think the response would be? What do you think they're going to say? Do you think they're going to say the government, or like who owes you like
Yeah,
which group actually owes you reparations?
Yeah, I think
They're
would
probably
say
going to say
government.
white people. Okay. Let's say Hispanics, Asians, whites, blacks, and the government. Which one? Oh, which one? Let's just like sort of isolate the rest of them and just choose between white and the government. Which one of those two do you think will have a higher vote count? The government or white people?
Higher vote count?
Yes.
The government or white people? I'm not understanding.
Let's sure. Okay, I'll rephrase it. Let's say we get a group of 150 pro reparations, whatever, descendants of slaves, whatever. If you were to make those people choose, let's say, I'm sure they're probably going to, some people are going to choose Asians, some people are even going to say Jews, who knows, right? But if we were to isolate the rest of them and just have them choose between whites and the government, which one will have the higher vote count out of those two?
White people?
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay,
so you
so
are saying
glad
that
that we
white
agree with
people are
that.
the majority of the taxpayers.
They would no, it's not because they're the majority, because they can still be the minority, but they would still believe that they are responsible for it. It doesn't matter if they could be the majority of the fact that the person the person whose race was responsible for slavery does not matter on whether or not they're the majority or the minority.
Yeah, white
You could
people
agree
are
on this.
responsible for slavery, but they're not
Sure.
responsible for reparations.
But they want the reparations because of the slavery, right?
No, they want the reparations because they did labor for the government and they were promised 50
And what kind of
acres and a
labor?
mule.
What kind of labor was that? Was that slave labor?
No, because they were promised work. They weren't slaves. They were.
I think you're just
they were
being
free.
difficult in this
They
guy.
were free people, and they were all leaving their slave encampments, and they were after. This is after the Civil War, and the general was riding around telling them that a bunch of houses and everything had been burnt down during the war and they needed help cleaning up and rebuilding. And so they asked these people to help them and follow him and clean up after like the vagabonds and all of this other stuff. And they went through and helped, and they were promised 50 acres and a mule for this.
What is the
didn't get it.
primary reason for people asking for reparations? For
Because they were
descendants
promised
of
50
slaves
acres
asking
and
for
a
reparations.
mule.
Not because of slavery, but because of the 50 acres and a mule. This is your actual reasoning behind reparations.
Yes.
Okay, I disagree completely.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think you're just. It seems like you're being very.
Or 40 acres and a mule. Yeah.
No, I disagree with that. I think it's predominantly because of like the whole slavery issue, them not being being discriminated against, and not being compensated in any way, where other groups were actually Jews were, Asians were, they put in internment camps and so forth, and they were compensated for those things, for those misdeeds, and black people weren't. And again, I understand why they may want reparations from white people, which you agree on finally.
Yeah, sure. And same with like Native Americans. They have a bunch of things that they were promised by the government and that they ask for because they were promised it by the government. But it's the same thing. Like it's only because it was promised by the government. Black people weren't promised money for being slaves. They weren't promised reparations for being slaves. I've had this debate a million times with people over reparations on the anti-reparation side, and I've just never heard the argument that you're claiming is like
I think the government response. The government response seems to be more of a pretext for actually wanting reparations from white people. I think that it's just like this sort of middle ground, or more of an acceptable response than to say, white people, because it I think it'll come across as racist or whatever. So that is like, it's more like an optical sort of response than anything else, in my opinion.
Okay. I mean, I don't think so, because I think if they wanted to make the argument for slavery, they could, because Japanese people got reparations from the American government. So I think if they wanted to make that argument, they could, but it's like,
No, I don't mean to like sound like hateful or anything. I mean, some people sound like I'm dog whistling or whatever. Or he says like, oh, okay, there was something. I'm sorry, but I just think that, because generally they would say that, yeah, it's from the we want reparations from the government or whatever. But if you were to ask them, like, yeah, but who's like, if you were to choose like what person, like, the government's formed by, groups of people or whatever that are, in charge of this or that, they'll probably just point at white people. I mean, that's just, she get to the bottom of what, you like narrow it down. That's just what it is. So, but again, that's just my sort of take or read on the whole deal there. So, and just to get back to the main point that we were having, and that is that you just cannot identify people based on like their actual views, because that's just not how people function generally. I actually think I won this debate. I don't know.
well done.
No, no, but yeah. I know you want to move on. Yeah. Do you say anyone had a question for me, or I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
you
want to
want
like
Bowman?
milk as much attention as possible or airtime as possible. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
I will be right back. Zach,
sure.
you're on.
Wait,
I
who?
gotta run to the restroom.
All right.
Wait, someone's like asking me questions now?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, Peacemaker. So,
Oh, hi.
hello, my name's Thack.
Oh, hi, Zach.
Hello. So, yes, when you say, I don't know if you were catching this or what, all that stuff. So when you say they mean white people, why are you not accepting the answer? The white people are the government because they're the majority of the country.
Because I feel like that response would still remain if white people would have become the majority. Like later on, if they were to become the minority in that particular, let's say in decades from now, I think they would still say the same. They'll still hold the same answer.
But
so
it's not
the fact that it's a majority does not mean anything. It's just the fact that it's them that they hold responsible for it.
Yes, but was not, if you're saying the answer is that white people back in the day did the slavery, and you're saying that if they become the minority later on the world, but the U.S. government was made by white people in the majority, so why not? The answer is the U.S.
That
government
still doesn't
appointed white
dispute
people.
anything that I've said.
Yes, it does.
I've already clarified. Okay, dude. I've already
Because
clarified
white people
to you
made up the
why.
government at the time, so the government owes them the money. That's what it is.
Okay, now because whites still hold the majority, it may seem synonymous to say white people or the government. But later on, if they were to become the minority, let's say 40 years from now, if you were to ask the person who's in favor of reparations, the response would not be the government anymore, because they're no longer the majority. They would just say, yeah,
but white people
owe us
made
reparations.
up the government at the still the time. They still see them like in this
That
scenario.
does not dispute anything that I'm saying. I don't know why you think that.
Because it is. Because they're
so?
not pointing. Because they're not saying this white guy needs to give me money. They're saying the white
government
people
is just like a abstract thing, dude. The government is an abstract
because
thing
it's made up of white people in the country of the majority.
Which we agree. Thank you for agreeing with me. Yes, the white people who formed the government are the ones in charge of it. So even if they become a minority, it would still be them who are responsible for it.
The white people at the time who made up the government did it. So that means that when the demographics shift, the government who was made by the white people still owes them that. That's why they point to white people.
Who voted in favor of slavery? Was it the government or the white people in the government?
It was both, because the white people were the majority.
Okay. I think
they happen to be the U.S. government voted for slavery.
I know it seems like you're actually answering my question, but you're not really, because
your question is
that whites are the ones who voted in favor of slavery or whatever. Like, so they
were the only ones voting in the goddamn government.
Let's say 40 years later,
wait, hold on, wait. We got to straighten this out real quick. Was there a vote on slavery?
Yeah.
I thought slavery was just a norm when white people
Yeah.
came over to the country. They immediately started enslaving like Native Americans, and it
There
was
was
just always
votes.
an
There was
accepted
votes
thing.
in.
Right.
There
When I
was
say
votes for-
vote, I mean like outlaw. Like if they sort of did not take part in outlawing slavery.
Okay, and at the time,
or they
who
were
made
in
up the
charge
government?
of the
Who made up the
government
government at the time? Who was the only people in power and who had voting rights?
I came here to have a conversation. This like debate, bro. Shit. This is like you're not
Because
actually
I'm
engaging
listening.
anything that I'm saying. It's
I
like
am
you're just like agreeing with me, but you're just like you want to pretend like you're not, just so you can like debate, bro. This like do this like debate, bro. Like
You're refusing
what
to
are you
accept
talking about?
because you're refusing to accept the premise that when people point to white people, when they say, wait, who owes me white people, they go, well, that's the government in their eyes, because it is them, because they're the majority of the country. They're the ones who did it back in the day because they had the power. So, and you're like, well, doesn't still accept it because, later on, what they're pointing to, white people means government. It's a shorthand. And you really refuse to accept that answer.
Let's say, for instance, let's like narrow this down to like a more simpler point. Let's say the Supreme Court, right? Let's think of the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court was like upheld, or let's say like made up of majority, let's say 100% of whites.
Okay, back to the
straight
Dred
white,
Scott decision? Yeah.
straight what? Okay, like straight white men were to like be the ones, forming the Supreme Court, let's say.
Uh-huh.
And if they all were to vote in favor of, let's say, enslaving or I don't know, something that's discriminatory against like minorities or like black people or Asians or whatever.
Yeah, like they did before.
So
yeah.
they are now, dude, you're just like so obnoxious. Like, can you just like let me finish a point? Chill. Okay, so if they were to vote in favor of something like, in slavery or like internment camps or whatever, like, putting Asians in a position that are Native Americans or whatever, even though, they went through the quote unquote Supreme Court to, make those decisions, the fact still remains that whites were the ones who voted in favor of those things. So let's say 100 years later, if whites become the minority in the country, they're probably like 5% of the overall population in the nation. And then those people are asking for reparations for whatever reason, or, for whatever thing happened to them in the past. They will not blame the Supreme Court for doing that to them. They will blame the people who were in charge at that particular time, which were white people.
They will say both. It was the government, the Supreme Court that was made up of a bunch of white people.
I'm sure they're not going to say like, yeah, white people voted from their homes or whatever to like enslave or do whatever to like what. It's like you're talking about like this sort of like middle ground there that like was like utilized to like make those decisions, but the fact still remains that the actual people who voted in favor of those things were of that particular racial demographic.
And that is what Tom is saying, is that's the shorthand, is that when he says the government, that's what he means. And you're saying, well, it's white people. Yes, that is the shorthand. White people in this country.
So we agree.
Currently, okay. You keep saying white people as in like they
okay. Wait. Let me frame it in this manner. Let's say that whites were 5% of the population, right? But they somehow managed to like still be in charge of the government.
Okay, so like South Africa. Here we go.
I don't think they are. I don't think they're the majority in government.
They were the
being 5% of the population.
The apartheid, and then or Zimbabwe.
Well, the apartheid, that doesn't mean like people weren't allowed to vote. So that it doesn't. That's kind of mean.
But they were still in Zimbabwe. They were still. That's the same demographic. Okay, they're still arguing. Can we just
proceed and like sort of both agree that you understand the point that I'm making?
Okay, yeah,
5%. Getting into the weeds or whatever. Okay.
So the government did some decision 100 years in the future now. Demographics.
So whites, despite being 5% of the population, they're still in charge of, like, let's say, the majority in the government, right? So they get to vote on certain things. Let's say to enslave Native Americans, or like remove them from certain, land to like transfer somewhere else or whatever. That being the case, even if, like, let's say 25 years later, they're no longer part of the government, because, though they're still a minority, if those people were to be asking for reparations, they will not hold the government accountable. They'll be holding white people accountable.
Absolutely. That, right? Native Americans always point to government. It's through the corner of their tree.
That's not the question that I asked.
Yeah.
I can use black people for like you're sort of like
If you're okay,
deflecting from
if
the argument.
if that's your argument, then but for that specific time,
Can you just answer my question?
Yeah, I am answering because your argument is okay. 100 years from now, if the majority, if like white people become 5% of it, and the government whatever is
And
like
they're still like making a majority of the government, yeah.
Yeah, and then they're still making the majority of the government. They're going to still say the U.S. government is still run by white people, and they're going to say the white people are the government.
If those people were to be asking for reparations for like a misdeed that was done to them, and the whites are no longer in charge in the government, they're no longer hold the majority in the government. Who do you think they'll be pointing at as the group that owes them reparations?
They're going to say the government that was made up of white people needs to give us
reparations. Can you just answer the question?
I just answered the question.
It has a simple answer.
No, it doesn't.
Be pointing at a group that owes them reparations.
You're not. It's oh my god.
Wait, hold on. Do you think that if like let's say 2 years, like 5 years later, or whatever, like when they're asking for reparations, and if the government is no longer like upheld, like whatever, like control or like made up of like majority whites, let's say that there was like 0% of like whites or whatever overall in government, you think they would still be blaming the government?
Yes,
for those things?
They're the ones who are still upholding
so
it.
The government is just like made up of majority black people, like like minorities. They would the government was okay.
Because the U.S. government fucked them. They still fucked them,
but
and they still
people in charge of the government at that particular time were not minorities.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They still did it. Because they represent the government. It doesn't matter if they do things. Okay, let's just say
just an abstract thing.
Okay, let's go with private.
Let's
go private world.
Actual people,
let's
which
go
are
private world.
the white
Let's go with private world. So a company does something bad, and then the company does something bad, but then later has to owe something, and people brought sue 50 years later due to something down the road. Do they point to the people only, or they say the company still owes us, even though the leadership still changes?
That's not analogous because we're not talking about different. We're not talking about different races here. We're talking about like there's no way to in that particular instance only the company versus like the actual.
But that's what the government is.
That is the distinction there. What we're talking about here is something that, let's say that different groups of people, based on race, that are easily distinguishable, and like, okay, so if the government were to like be made up of like majority whites or whatever, I don't think that's the case, and well, maybe not, whatever. But if there's a law passed, let's say that the government's like made up of like 100% of whites, if there's a law passed like criminalizing certain behaviors that are like predominantly found in like black communities, and those people were to like sort of rebel against like that kind of law, who do you think they'll be blaming for it? Do you think it'd be the government or white people?
Both. It's the same.
If they were to choose one of them, which one would it be?
Because it's the same. They wear them. Okay, they can't choose them. They can't separate. They can't separate.
Blank.
That's the point.
Let's like draw a blank there, right? Let's like draw a blank line. And that would be a blank discriminated against us. Which one would that be? Would it be white people or the government?
Okay, again, I'm going to say this again.
I just need an answer, bro.
And I'm saying white people in this situation, when they say white people, they mean the government too at the same time.
It doesn't matter if they mean the government to like saying white people or whatever. Like if we're talking about like actual groups of people, would it be Hispanics, Asians, whites, or whatever? Because like
you already put it up. You already put it up. White people is the government.
Can make up part of the government at different times.
White people in the government in your scenario. Okay, you can't separate it. I don't know.
Yes, you can. We're talking.
Yes, you can.
The government can be made up of any groups of people. The government's like a job.
The man is white people in government. Okay, who is the man? It's a white person in government. That's who the man is. Your example is all the time is like, who are they pointing to? Who's keeping this down? It's white people who are the government. They are the white people. They're the government.
When you say the government did this to me or whatever, people like that's not okay. So when a person votes, or like let's say a government like makes a big decision or whatever, like it affects the lives of certain groups of people, and there's like a particular group that makes up the majority of that, let's say governmental institution. If this person were to be asked, like, okay, who discriminated against you? Like, who did what to you? Like, okay, yeah, I get that it was through the government, but like, who did it to you? This person will be pointing at the groups of people, or like the particular group of people who made up the majority in that particular case, as the ones culpable for doing those things to them. That's just how life works. pretending like that's just like people. Okay, like whenever people say white or whatever they mean, like I get all that, but that's not what we're talking about.
That's what
And I
it
think you
still
get the
is
point that I'm
baked
making
in the
here, but you're just like
system.
getting into weeds, so it's just like
No, because you
It's playing
refuse to
debate-
just accept.
debate
Because you just
tactics
refuse to. It's not a debate tactic. It's just you refuse to move to accept it. That's all it is. We've been here stuck because you just refuse to accept when people say white people, they also mean the government. That's all the Tom meant.
right, but we all know that the government can be made after different groups of people, right?
The government is made
So
up of
when you
groups of
say the
people, so it's Tom.
government, okay,
Yes,
what if
and
the government now is like majority black? Okay, so were black people the ones who did this? Like if they were like
not
if they were
currently.
like asking to be like be holding those particular people accountable.
Well, that's
You
the
would
not
point.
say,
Is that
yeah, it's
if
just
the
the government,
government
bro. It's like,
today,
it's just, like,
if
made
the
up, like-
government today was majority black, they would still expect reparations in the same way.
from black people.
Yes,
From the government, yeah,
from the government, not
When
from
the black people
people.
black people make up the government, they still say, "Hey, give me my money."
Okay,
Which is why they
If,
want
let's say-
representation in government, is because they feel like the more black
Right.
people they got into government, the more likely they
But
would
they
will
will no
be
longer
to
be
get
asking.
reparations.
They will no longer be asking for reparations. Like if they're like no more white in the country, it wouldn't make any sense at that
Yes, they
point.
will. They'll be like, "Hey, guys, we
Oh,
now took the
God,
power. Why do you think there has been people pushing for
This is
people
so
that have who are pro
Not-
reparations? Okay, up a village in Chicago have done this. They elected a new council made up of
All right, so
minority people who approve
Got it.
reparations.
Okay.
And they took it.
Reparations come from what? Let's say it's a form of like like let's say compensation, some sort of funds, right?
Okay,
Okay,
taxpayer.
those
Yeah,
those funds come from the taxpayers. Who will be the taxpayer giving reparations to black people?
from everybody because that's what the government is.
But
It's
if the
everybody.
country's majority black, or let's say 80% black, or like 20% Hispanic, or whatever, like maybe 19% Hispanic, like the other 1% is like whatever, ambiguous. Who would be the people responsible for reparations at that point?
It's the people. Yes,
The-
because they're
so
taxpayers.
you will be
because the Demo-
charging other blacks and native like Hispanics for
and they-
reparations
and they would
to
say
pay.
it's still the government, and it came from
The
paying back
government
from.
doesn't work because you're talking about like a group like behind the government.
Okay, but
are
they all pay
people.
taxpayers. No, people pay taxes, man. They don't
Just
fucking
like
audit.
funds, like money does not rain into like this
Yes.
big bucket, which is like the government. Like
Yes, it
just the funds
can.
come from people like taxpayers, dude.
Yeah, and then also they theoretically can do this, but all that stuff. I'm saying is that just because the majority of the demographics changed, it still was the government back
My
in the day, and
point
they still
is
getting that. They're just
That
saying like
without
people,
whites present, asking for reparations will not make any sense, and I think we all agree with that.
No,
we do
no,
not.
dude. They
Okay.
still feel like there is a systematic harm done to them. For them to catch up, they need this reparations.
Done
That's
to them by whom?
by
It
the
doesn't
government
matter.
who made by the white people. Oh my
So
god!
if the government is now 100% black,
It doesn't
then
change. They
the
still owe
government will
it.
still be the black people are
Hold
paying
on.
all the black people reparations.
Listen, hold on, because your argument
the most
is that they're trying to get like revenge instead of them
not even
feeling like they're
revenge,
actually.
it's-
Yes, it is. You are
Pretty
saying
clear,
that
white
it's
people are
not.
responsible.
Yes, exactly. You're
the
saying
ones
that
who owe
white people are
reparations.
responsible and they want revenge on white people. That if it wasn't white people, they wouldn't want it anymore, which means that it is revenge now. It is revenge on white people. That is what
You
you're saying. It's not
you
that
can
they're
see it
owed
that way.
something.
It doesn't change
it's
the
that
fact that
they're
it
it's
is
revenge.
reparations.
No,
Yeah,
it's
you
not.
can call it that if
They're
you want, that's
owed
fine.
something. They're owed
Just
something.
like this,
is the
like
argument.
chatter. It's like okay, like does he think like you just like ask random white people? Yes, you. That's not how that works. Like the government is actually going to charge certain people. Like
No, they're
whatever,
going to
like,
charge certain people.
whites-
They're just going to
whites
take money.
make up the majority of of people in the nation. Therefore, there are going to be the ones that are mostly held accountable for it.
And you think if the demographics change in 100 years, if you think
Yes.
the demographics change in 100 years, and
Yes.
somehow white people was only like 30% of the population,
If they're
black
1% of the
people-
population, if they're just 1% of the population, let's say they're like 0.9%, 0.8% of the population.
and you
asking-
think
and,
black
like, the
people are not
rest of them
gonna
are, like,
ask
if-
for
let me
reparations
finish
from
the point.
government?
If the rest of them are like 99.96% or whatever are made up of black people, asking for reparations would kind of be meaningless at that point because you have black people asking for reparations from other black people. It would just not make any sense.
Okay,
I don't know,
that's
like why you
different.
pretend like
That's
it
no.
doesn't.
That's a different because in your eyes you said, well, that doesn't
That's
make any
literally the point
sense.
that I made earlier.
But your point is, but no, we're saying is that they would still make the argument is still because it was a promise held in the back in the
Wait,
back in the
but
past.
wait, hold on. But I thought that the government was the one accountable for reparations.
Yes, because the government made the
just ask the government. Ask the governments who will be who will be like giving the taxpayer money.
Reparations is something that was
99% of
owed.
black people to other black people. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Because they still is their money back in the day that needs to be given to
Yeah,
them.
so they're getting their money back in the form of reparations.
Yes, it's interest. It's interest. It's paying back it's paying back from it. It's the whole concept of paying something back. Just because it changed the makeup in the current future doesn't mean you still can't get it from back in the past. That's the argument.
But who do you get it from? You don't just like pay it to the government like as a form of tax and they just like get it right back. It's like, oh, it's not reparations.
It's from their budget.
What is like a tax return? Is that like the new reparations now?
No, yeah, you can do it. We've done it. Stimulus. What do you think that is? We can just do a stimulus. We also can do it's from the budget. They just Congress just
right.
votes
But the
for
only
it.
difference is that with the stimulus, everyone benefits from it, not just particular.
Well,
no. The thing is that we pay the same taxes either way. So it's not like all of a sudden they decide that they're going to do reparations. No, it does, because if they say that they're going to do reparations, the taxes don't go up on white people. We're paying into it. Black people are paying into it. Mexicans are paying into it. All of us are paying the same taxes regardless of whether or not there are reparations. So either way, it's all coming from the same pool. It's the government who's paying it, not us. We're paying the same thing regardless of what the government pays.
I kind of look this up. Like, who actually pays like the majority of taxes in the United States? Like, what particular demographic?
White people.
White people that are rich.
Yes. But that's you making an argument for the majority again. That's you making an argument for the majority again.
Okay, these arguments are all intertwined. So let me make my point here. So
if you change the demographics, it'll be
it's all convoluted, intertwined.
No, if you change the demographics, it doesn't make any sense to ask for reparations. Like, they will no longer make up the majority, so they will not be the majority of taxpayers in the first place. It wouldn't be meaningless at that point.
It's not meaningless.
No. What? Oh.
It's not meaningless because it's something that was owed to them, promised to them.
No, it would be meaningless in a sense that they would just like be charging other black people to pay other black people for reparations. That's why it's meaningless.
It's not charging
getting taxpayer money, just like handing it. That's what I mean by it, dude.
It's already taken from
semantics
them.
Here.
It's already taken from them. It's already taxed.
Yes,
but
it's being used for something that's not meant to be used for.
Apparently it was.
Yes, I get that. You still pay taxes whether or not you give people reparations or not. You still pay taxes. I get that part. The point is that you're taking it from a group of black people to just hand it to like black people. Like, would it make any sense at that point?
But I don't know what your demographics are in the future, so I don't know.
I just told you, like 1% of white people, like it was still not.
Okay.
At that point, it would be meaningless.
And then the whole point is that the reason why this falls apart, why me and Tom kind of like also.
I don't care the point. Just explain, dude. Just make your point. I don't like.
Okay, well, I am making my point. Is that the reason why we stop at this point because we get to this point where you have to decide then who gets the reparations. But we're not even at that point yet because we haven't even argued that reparations should even be given. So that's what we're arguing about. Is that the concept of this?
Yes, I don't want reparations. I don't agree with reparations. I don't believe in reparations. I don't think it's a good idea.
We're not talking about whether or not we agree with reparations or not.
No, that's the point that he's making is that like we can only make this argument so far. We're just steelmailing somebody else's argument to try to explain that the way that you're wording this as though they want it from white people isn't possible because that's not what they're asking for.
I feel like we're rewinding back to the part where we talked about whether or not we agree with it. We're sort of we're past that point right now. We're talking about who's going to be accountable for it.
No, but this is all this. No. You're talking about who's accountable for to settle that argument. This is why you're making that argument. It's to settle that argument.
Who will be mostly accountable for paying reparations to black people? If the nation were to be 1% white and like 99% black.
And if the government,
yes, I get that the government be the one hand. So like we're not gonna like go around like fucking robbing people or whatever. We get that part.
Okay, but you're also not letting me say.
Can I finish, dude? It's like a 2v1. Can I just like at least get time to make my point?
You're not ready.
I'm not.
You're not understanding the thing.
I'm not okay. Well, can you just like take it? When is your time to speak and like just like explain to me when I don't understand it? Appreciate it.
All right.
So when you have whites like making up 1% of the population, and like black people like making 99, like let's say 95 or whatever percent of the population. At that point, giving out reparations to black people would not make any sense. It's just like I keep just repeating this over and over. It would not make any sense because like you be getting the money, majority like the taxpayer money,
Oh my
becomes
God.
like other black people supposed to like anyone else.
Okay.
Like, so you would like just getting the payments from
So
other black taxpayers to hand them around to like what? Like,
just
how does
the
that work?
problem
Like,
is that when you say that, the entire problem is like, why do they want reparations? What is the argument for
I don't care
reparations?
why
If
they
it
want
doesn't,
reparations.
it
We're talking about
that is
who's
literally all
paying
that
for it.
matters, though. Because
No,
when you say
no, it's not.
listen,
I'm talking
yes,
about
it
who's
is.
paying for it.
I understand, but you just said that it doesn't make sense to do it anymore if it's not white people paying it, which means that
Right.
what is the reason for paying it? That's all that matters now is what is the reason for paying
No.
it? Because because if you're saying
It
that it
doesn't
no
matter.
longer matters if white people aren't the ones who are paying the majority of it anymore, then that means that you are going off of a presupposition that the reasoning for this is based on the whiteness of who is paying it. You are already presupposing that.
You're trying to derail this conversation.
No, that is exactly what you're doing.
Else,
That is
Every time.
literally what is
yeah,
That's what
happening.
you're
I
doing.
know
That
you're
is
gonna
what
agree
you're
with
doing.
Tom. I get that part. You're one of his fans. I get that.
Oh
But
my-
my point is that
My God. I don't know how you don't understand
Okay.
that when you because you keep saying like, well, why would they do it? Because they're just taxing themselves and they're black. And I'm like, okay, so then you keep saying like, if white people are gone, there's no reason to do this. I don't understand.
Okay, I'm not gonna fall for the derailment thing. Who will be who will be accountable? Who will be the taxpayers? Let's say in a 99% black country, who will be the taxpayers accountable for handing out reparations to black people?
It will be the tax-paying base, which is 99% black people. It
So then you have black. Okay, that's sufficient enough of an answer. That's fine. So then you have black people paying other black people reparations, basically. I get
Yes,
it.
that
The
was
government, because
promised.
they're not gonna like pull out their wallets. I get
Okay.
that part.
Okay, but the point was that was promised to them. Yes, they'll be paying the money that was promised to them.
But who's supposed to be accountable for it? That's like the
The
point.
government. The government is fulfilling the promise.
The implicit understanding of reparations is not that other black people are going to be accountable for it. It's like
Well, that's because you changed the hypothetical, though. That's why
the hypothetical is just to show that your argument does not make any sense. Just like pointing at the government, it's kind of meaningless because if the country changes and it's like majority a different race, then it would not make any sense to like any longer hand out reparations.
So you're saying, in your
at that point, you
idea,
have black people giving like it makes no sense at that point.
Okay, so you're saying it makes no sense just because the demographic shift, a wrong the government did, and then promised to do something to address that wrong. Just because the demographic shift, who cares? Who cares?
No, it doesn't make sense because the people being held accountable for paying others reparations are the same people who themselves were victims or descendants of victims of slavery or whatever.
But the people who will be doing this, who got voted in, who the people who vote on this, is holding their government accountable to something they promised to. That is the point.
No, they're holding themselves accountable at that point because oh god, dude, this is like a okay. I feel like we're just going in circles.
I got one more person. We're gonna let thank you, Thak. We're gonna let one more person jump in. Z King. And then after this we'll have to move on because it is getting late.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yo.
Okay. So Peacemaker, I was just gonna start by asking you this: you actually believe if hypothetically it was like a predominantly black society and there were enslaved people who were mostly black, do you think those people who were enslaved and the generations that come after them, right, the descendants, do you think those people would not desire any kind of reimbursement for what happened just because they're majority the same race?
Here's the answer to your question. I think that when the average black person it's like in favor of reparations, I think that what they have in mind for reparations is that the white man owes us.
We're not talking about white people. We're just talking specifically.
Well, I'm going to get to the answer though, but I'm trying to like frame it in a way that will make my answer make sense. So that is the implicit sort of a assumption there is that the white man is that did us wrong, therefore he's the one accountable. Yeah, I get that the government will be the ones handing out the checks or whatever form of compensation, but there's this particular group that it's solely responsible for the discrimination or on and on of black people. This person is the one who's going to be held, liable or accountable for, whatever misdeeds that were done in the past. And because they hold the majority of the population at that particular time in the US or whatever country we're talking about, that is why reparations from the government will make sense. If the country changes, if the country becomes 99% black and just like 0.2% white or whatever, and whatever the other rest of the demographics would be, it would not make any sense to any longer ask for reparations because the people who are in charge of the government are black people. The
So you
people,
think
majority of
specifically
the taxpayers in this case will be black people. So if reparations come from a majority black demographic, at that point it would not make any sense because that particular group of taxpayers who make up the majority at that time were not responsible for those things. They probably themselves are victims of that particular system that sort of predated them or whatever hundreds of years back. So it would not make any sense to charge to have those majority black taxpayers pay other black people for reparations. It just wouldn't make any sense at all. So
the problem is you're conflating people's attitudes towards racism versus what the government permitted. Racism is a factor in this conversation, but that's not exactly, it's the same as saying what the government permitted. So the problem with this is if you can't accept that you literally think just because they're all like majority black, because of that factor that they wouldn't want any kind of reimbursement for what they endured. That's absurd. I mean, I don't even know how you could
from whom though?
From the people that inflicted it.
Right, but if the people that inflicted it are no longer part of make like a substantive amount of the population, a substantial amount in like the U.S. whatever nation's population, who are you getting the payments from? Who are you getting the compensation from?
The taxpayers. It's not
about the taxpayers are the same people who are probably asking for the reparations.
It's not
because they make up the majority of it.
Okay, what you're not understanding is it's not inherently about the race. Racism was a
It
factor.
doesn't matter if it's about race or not. What I'm asking you is the people who make up the majority of the government are the same people who will probably be asking for the reparations. So who is there to charge? Are they just going to charge each other for pay? How does this work exactly?
It's the people who endured the infliction of the enslavement who would be asking the reparations. So it doesn't matter if black people were majority of society, they would still be asking from those other black people.
But none of those people will still be present 4 centuries back. How would you be able to track any of those people? They sort of intermix or whatever. How would you be able to track?
We're not talking about
the actual people.
We're not talking about how to administer reparations. That's not the conversation. The conversation is whether or not they would desire that. And the answer to that is obviously yes, because of what they endured.
We already agreed on this. What is your
I don't see how you don't comprehend this. This is like if I go to a job and then I work my fucking 40 hours and they pay me half my paycheck.
I get the point. Dude, I get you. What is
So I guess I don't need the rest of my paycheck. It doesn't make any fucking sense. Of course,
you didn't even make this argument. What are you talking about? You're making arguments no one here is making. You're just fabricate. You're pretending this is argument being had here. Well, I'm disagreeing that people shouldn't be owed certain payments or whatever just because they're the population changes. I'm top of loading. I was I'm too stupid to understand whatever you're saying. That's not what we're talking about, dude.
No one's talking about whether they actually deserve it. We're talking about if they want it. That's the conversation. People want it because of what they.
That's not what I'm talking about.
And why they want it.
Exactly, and why they.
That's why we keep saying that you're presupposing that there are other things. So when you say it defeats the purpose if they're no longer white, you are presupposing a purpose of this, and so that's what he's disagreeing with you on. Is saying,
purpose?
well, that's exactly. That's
what purpose am I presupposing? I'm asking the question.
So okay, so when you say,
let me answer.
Just answer the question, Tom. Sorry.
Okay, so when you say that it is that it defeats the purpose if they're no longer white. You have to tell us what that purpose is, but you keep denying that you're presupposing a purpose.
The purpose is that whites are the ones who are maybe implicitly, or to some people more explicitly, accountable or responsible for paying reparations to just groups that were discriminated against, in this case black people. I made this point clear from the beginning. Whites are the ones to be held accountable for it. Majority, the average black person thinks. Can I just I'm gonna say what I just said if you just let me finish.
You have to pay attention to what you said, though. You said the groups that were discriminated
with the ad homs.
The groups that were discriminated against. That's not an ad hom. That's just pointing out what you're talking about.
Saying that I'm not paying attention to what I'm saying is kind of an ad hom.
The groups that were discriminated against. There was obviously a focus on specific groups. What groups? The people that were just black, or the people that were not only black but also enslaved. There's another element to it. It's not solely because of that they want the reparations. It's because of the enslavement.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I think the problem is
the blacks. Yeah, I think the problem is I'm too stupid. Right? The blacks that were not enslaved versus the ones that were.
I mean, here's the overall. Well, here's the overall problem.
No. You repeat the point you made earlier.
You're using debate tactics because
no, dude, we're not going to get into meta conversations. Can we just use rephrase your point, please?
Dominant race, and about white people enslaving black people.
I think you wanted to ask me a question about something. Isn't that you just came here
I did ask you a question. I did ask you.
What's your question?
You already admitted. Well, you already admitted that you didn't really agree with it.
Rephrase your question, please.
Sure, yeah, I'll ask it again. So my question was, do you think the people, and hypothetically, it was a 90% predominantly black society, that the black people who were enslaved in the same society with the other black people who weren't enslaved, that they would want reparations? And my answer was they would, because they want reimbursement for what they endured and what their descendants, what their descendants want the reimbursement of what their ancestors endured.
And from whom would they want that reimbursement?
They would want it from the country that permitted it.
So if that country's made up of 100% black people, then you have all the black taxpayers paying them back for those misdeeds, right?
Yeah, for the people, you would have the country pay it for the people who endured it.
I don't want to hear the country or we know who we're talking about. The taxpayers, the government, they just print their own people. Well, they kind of do, but people actually are the ones funding the government. Would you agree, right?
Yeah, it's people funding the government. They pay into that.
So the people who will be funding the government that would have those funds, that are allowing the government to have those funds to be able to hand out reparations, who will be those people if the country's 99% black?
The ideal would be the people who were descendants of slaves.
No, that's not an answer to my question.
That is an answer.
The government is 99.9% black. The taxpayers, who are the people funding the government if the government is made up, if the country's made up of 99.9% black people?
Black people funding it, but the reparations would go out to the descendants of slaves. How is this hard to understand?
So then we have black people paying reparations to other black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's the point. Yes, exactly.
Okay. And my point of that is that doesn't make any sense because you're not going to. Those black people were not responsible for any misdeeds or enslavement of any of those people. Therefore, it would not make any sense to charge those people because they're no longer
you keep conflating the culture. You keep conflating the attitude that people have towards racism versus what the government permitted. That's the problem. That's why you're not getting this.
The problem is that
those people,
but that still matters.
Would still want reparations regardless if it was majority black or majority white. Sure, under the white
they want reparations because the government's made up of majority white people.
Black people, of course, they're still going to want reparations for what their ancestors.
Okay, so your question. I think I've answered your question sufficiently at this point.
Hold on. So this is why we keep going back to the purpose of the reparations. And each time we do, you start saying, "Well, we're already past that," but we're not, because every time you say, "Well, that defeats the purpose of the reparations," this is why we keep going back to the purpose of the reparations, because you have to have that argument, but you won't have it because it defeats everything that you're saying afterwards. The purpose of the reparations would say whether or not that defeats the purpose of the reparations.
Give some sort of compensation to people who were discriminated against in the past, right? And that also understanding that is that discriminated against a government that was made up by majority white people, right?
Yes.
But we would agree that if the country's the government's no longer made up by that particular group and is made up, let's say, by black people, the same people who will be asking for reparations, it would defeat the whole purpose because now the people, well, let's say the government, the population, because that tends to be
Wait, you don't think
Here-
black people can
So if
discriminate
that-
against each other?
Wait. No,
You don't
hold
think
on.
that?
Wait. No, this will make sense.
that's
Okay.
outside of
Okay.
the
Okay.
point I'm
Okay.
making.
So is the purpose
Not
for the
really.
government to pay the reparations, or is the purpose for the people to receive the reparations?
Wait, come again? What's the
Is
the
so
purpose of
we're
the government to
making the
pay
argument we're making the argument that the entire purpose of reparations is for black people to receive the reparations. But it sounds like you're making the argument that actually the purpose is for the government to pay the
No, the
reparations as long
purpose-
as the government is white.
The purpose of reparation is it's basically for whites to give a compensation to black people because of discrimination that they experienced. But the means, it will be through the government. It will be through the federal government. So we would not have, the only reason why we include the government is just to say that, okay, yeah, of course you're not gonna have like black people asking random people for like money or whatever. We just gonna it's gonna go through the government. The taxpayers which are majority white, which make up the majority of the percentage of taxpayers, they will be the ones that are accountable for that, basically. So that's why I'm including the government. The government will just facilitate those payments in a way that it's not going to be cause any conflict because everyone agrees that everyone will be okay with paying taxes as opposed to like having random people like asking them for money or whatever. That's going to be
Wait, let me ask you
cause more,
something.
creates more
Let me
conflict.
ask you a question really quick. Why do you think that black people specifically, did he leave? Did he
might
leave?
have fallen out.
Oh shit. I was gonna ask him, I wonder why he thinks black people want white people to pay it.
Well, so that's what we went over. Is he kept saying it was because of racism and slavery.
Well, yeah, but you could be racist to someone, but that doesn't mean you took away their autonomy. Like, what does that have to do with it?
Okay, he's back.
Okay, I think I'm back. Yeah.
I don't know if you heard my question, but my question was, why do you
I think I
think
left because of your question.
Oh, okay. It was gonna grow you too much. I get it.
Good
But if I wonder why you think this. So if you really think that it's just because of race, it's just because black people want white people specifically, no other reason to pay back reparations because of racism.
No,
What about
it's
the
majority. Like
racism?
it's like 90% like
Wait,
just because of race.
let's be real. Don't deflect. What part of the
I'm clarifying.
racism, what part of the racism would make them want reparations? Is it just someone being like racist towards them, or did more happen than that?
I think that there's like this implicit understanding or this like bias that they have against white people because of like certain discriminatory actions that were perpetuated against them. And I think that because of that, like in a country where you have like different like multiple demographics, like multiracial whatever country, the way to distinguish like who is responsible, because like the government's like this abstract thing that can change at any time. It can disappear any minute or whatever, depending on like the whatever happens in the nation. But I feel like a way to narrow that down in a better specific manner would be just to point at the group that made up the government at that particular time. And that group,
But
it's understood to be black.
But how
white,
does being
majority
racist
straight
affect
white
someone?
men.
How does being racist affect someone's autonomy? It's just being racist. You're just being mean to them, basically.
I feel like we're getting derailed to something else that we're not talking about. You're asking me how's being racist a bad
How
thing?
does being racist affect someone's autonomy?
That question is nothing to do with what we're talking about. I could engage with that, but it's besides
I
the
mean,
point.
but you're saying it's because of racism. But what does racism do?
It's
What is
because of enslavement of certain groups. I mean, one
Wait,
thing is to
wait.
be
So
mean to a
is it
person.
racism? Is it racism, enslavement?
Slavery. I would just say slavery. The force.
Is it slavery
the-
and racism, or just one of them?
Well, a lot. Okay, I would disagree that racism is just like being mean to a person, like not hiring a person, or like
preventing certain people from like buying homes and
Sure,
things
we
like
could
that. Like,
expand
you
them,
know,
but
those are
what is
different types of
racism?
racism. So I would disagree with your characterization. They're just like being mean to people.
Oh yeah, that's just a very menial definition. Of course, it's more expansive than that. But I'm asking you, what is the racism actually doing? How did it get people to think that white people owe them something?
When you think a
What?
person that's lesser than, when you think a person is lesser than, or like a person that's like does not belong in certain areas, or like it's not worth living, or it's not worth like the basic treatment of a human being, I think that that leads to a lot of people. Like, let's say if there's like a majority population that starts to like look down on those people as like lesser than, or like subhumans or whatever.
I
I
mean, I
think
find it
that
interesting you're
if
saying this
that
because you just
sentiment
gave me
gets
the answer.
spread around, enough in the media and so forth, I think that can change the mind of a lot of people, and make them even vote in favor of enslaving certain groups of people. So I think that's in
Okay,
a way
so
the
just to
racism
clarify
kicking
that,
that
do you think it's
to
just
that
racism,
anyway.
or do you think it's racism plus enslavement?
I think one could lead to the other, but both could also be an answer,
Why do you think it's both?
because you can still have slaves but not be racist to them.
Really?
Sure.
Interesting. So if there was
Well,
a
in a
slave
way, if you
owner,
think about like the Irish, or like the whatever, like indentured servants, those, that was like a form of slavery, but it was not, you were not being racist to those people. I mean, in a lot of cases, like uh I think I missed the word now. Indentured servants, they were like people who were like prisoners. They were, like
yeah,
prisoners from like the same nations that would like travel to the United States or whatever, and like their own people would actually enslave them. Like they would,
yeah,
well,
they
not
basically had
enslave them, but like
contracts.
indentured servants. Like they would serve a certain
They had
amount of time. So
contracts. They could
that was
serve.
like in a
Yeah.
way a form of slavery, but the people, they were not being,
It was very shitty labor, basically, back in the day.
they weren't being
Um,
racist against them.
yeah, so I guess my question to that would be, okay, you believe that you can be a slave owner without being racist, then why would a black person who was enslaved by a white person be resentful of them if that white person was not racist?
Because, well, I never said that they weren't racist. I just
You
said
just
that
said they
in
were.
some cases
Did you
you
not
can
just
have
say that?
slavery without racism. I gave you the case of where they were different of the same race, that's indentured servitude. In that
Well,
case,
that's
I
not
don't
what I
think
was saying.
the
I was
enslavement. No,
wondering
wait,
like,
wait, wait, I'm answering your question here, because
not
you're
really.
asking me certain questions, but then you're like, you seem to pretend like you're not understanding the answers, and then just like try to like straw man the things that I'm saying. But the point that I'm making is that yes, you can have slavery without racism, but there's also a combination of both. You can have racism and slavery both present, or you can just have racism in the absence of slavery. So it's sort of a combination of either or kind of
I
thing.
guess here's a better question, right? So if it's racism is the root of this, let me just clarify that. Do you think racism is like
Yeah, the other ones
the
are
root
quite
of why
shitty. I'm not
black
gonna lie.
people white want reparations?
Wait, what?
I'm just gonna be clear. So do you think racism is the root of why black people want reparations?
I think part of that. I think that having a person be racist can change the mind of a black person who's probably previously against reparations. Maybe them experiencing racism could lead to them, them being in favor of reparations. So that, I guess, I could change the mind of some people.
All right,
So
I
if you
do.
think
I really. I'm sorry. I gotta move on. I
Tom,
gotta
come
that-
on,
move.
that's okay,
bro.
man.
I'm
I
sorry.
don't think he gets it. I don't think he's gonna get it, but that's
By
fine.
the way, follow my YouTube, guys. Like, I'm trying to. How do I milk this even more, Tom? Sorry.
Just tell them where your YouTube.
I'm kidding. I
channel
don't have a
is.
YouTube channel. I mean, this is
Oh.
like, I don't have a channel.
What the hell? Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Actually, it's like a great conversation. It's like better than my other fucking retarded conversations. I feel like I did a lot better here.
Well, I'm glad you
All right.
feel that way. All right.
Dude, damn.